Vol Fanatic Show from Cornersville, Tennessee hit me and said, the SEC gets 5 of 12 playoff spots. Now, this was a bold prediction from them, but I thought to myself, that's so good we could make our own segment out of that. So here's my question to all of you. Get 12 teams in the playoff this year. How many of them are going to be SEC teams? You know, this could get pretty crazy here, because I'm going to remind you once, and this won't be the last time, we're not just taking the top 12 teams in the country. It is a conditional 12. There are auto bids, and the auto bid process is going to get messy. And so just remember, just because you think a lot of SEC teams are going to be in the top 12 doesn't mean all of them are going. So my guess, right now, right here, it is June 13th, the year of our Lord 2024. I think 5 SEC teams are going to the playoff. What do you think? I'm looking at the poll right now, and most of you are landing between 3 and 4. I saw a lot of 5. I saw a lot of 5 sentiment earlier today, but some of you thought 5 was a little bit of a stretch. So the odds, obviously there's a ton of SEC teams in the top 12 on the preseason totals from FanDuel. But that's not always how it's going to work out this year or any given year. So I thought Ace Football Analytics had a really good reply. When I put this on Twitter earlier today, they do a really good, it could be a he, it could be a they. Whoever runs the Ace Football Analytics account does a really good job. They replied, I think, with a really good take. They said there's 2 likely scenarios here. One, the SEC gets 5 teams in, everyone else is outraged, and they are calling for expansion to begin immediately. I could see it. Or scenario 2, the SEC only gets 2 to 3 in, they're outraged, and they threaten to break away from the NCAA, poach a few teams, form their own league and their own playoff with the Big Ten. And you know what he said at the end, which I agree with? Both are likely to happen. I completely agree with that. Both are likely to happen. That's why, as much as it pains me that we've expanded this thing, you don't see me moaning and complaining overtly about it because I don't know how permanent it is. And I'm not just saying that out of randomness on this show. I'm not just saying that spouting off at the mouth. It may sound like I am. I'm not the only one who feels that way, and some people with semi-guided knowledge on the matter do not feel like we're just set for life with this 12-team format. Now, true enough, maybe it expands further, but there's also a world where it contracts. There's a world where it breaks off entirely and there are new products. And I'm not saying I like it or dislike it. I'm just saying we're not fixed right now. So, yeah, obviously, if the SEC only gets 2 to 3 teams in and it wasn't a disaster year for the conference, if they get 2 to 3 in but they really genuinely feel like they deserve more, they're not going to sit back and take that. Other conferences would have to take it. But if the Big Ten or the SEC genuinely feel like they've been done wrong in this thing, there will be action. And the other thing is the SEC is sitting there still playing 8 conference games, and they're waiting. They're saying, we will play 9 as long as you guys do the right thing at the end of the day and take some of our 9-3s over their 10-2s or 11-1s. We'll be happy to voluntarily strengthen our schedule more. But if you don't, if you really pretend like you are what your record says you are, we are not voluntarily going to a 9-game conference schedule. So there's all that. But also, there is the other side. There is the side where the SEC gets 6 teams in. Half the field ends up being SEC teams. That's not crazy. It may make you mad, so it may be maddening, but it's not crazy. I mean, I get angry when I miss a traffic light all the time, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was the wrong thing to happen. I mean, it's timed up and it did what it was supposed to do. But I will tell you this. There is a scenario this year where the SEC ends up getting like 5 or 6 teams in, and a lot of you are outraged, and a lot of you start yelling what? SEC bias, right? And I just think that maybe you want to rethink that. I'm just looking down the road. What could happen is the SEC gets like 6 teams in the playoff, and you live in Omaha, Nebraska, and you say, SEC bias, that's the only explanation. And actually what could happen is the only thing that prevented more teams from the SEC from being in is the SEC. What do you mean, Josh? That sounds like it makes no sense. It makes sense. Because here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is at the end of the year, we're going to get there, and inevitably, a whole bunch of SEC teams are going to have really good resumes. And if I were to press a button and they all became blind resumes, and you just had to pick and you didn't know who they were and you didn't know which conference they were in, some of you who claim SEC bias, if you were fair about it, would probably end up putting 7 or 8 of them in the playoff. But as it stands, we do know, and we do see that conference sticker or affiliation. And so if it comes down to 5 of them already being in, and then there's a coin flip between a 9-3 Alabama and an 11-1 Oklahoma State, someone on that committee, several someones are going to say, we can't put another SEC team in, can we? Well, actually, that's not the way it's supposed to work, but it's the way it probably will work. So the best weapon against that thing becoming overly saturated with SEC teams is actually that SEC sticker. Although I know that makes little sense to some, especially in the SEC bias crowd, be glad you can tell who the teams are, or else there may be more in there. There is a difference in competitive versus the level of play. And this is the great unknown to me. The Big 12 is going to be insanely competitive this year. Could be the most fun conference in college football to watch. By and large, the Big 12 is not going to be playing the same caliber football that a lot of the SEC will be playing. How much is that properly interpreted? First off, am I right about that? So if I'm wrong, I'm just wrong. But if I'm right about that, is it properly interpreted? If I watch Utah versus Kansas State go to triple overtime and it's just an instant classic, do I get fooled into thinking because all of these games out here are competitive and this team's 11-1, they are the same caliber as maybe a 10-2 LSU? Got to be careful with that. I'm not a committee member, but I'm saying these are the conversations we're going to be having. Because if you do fall into that trap of thinking that you are what your record says you are, all power conferences are equal, therefore an accomplishment in this conference at 10-2 is roughly equal to that of this conference being a 10-2, the SEC and the Big Ten aren't going to have that. So I don't know how many teams the SEC is going to get in this year. My guess is benefit of the doubt will go their way. I don't think that's the craziest notion in the world. Why would benefit of the doubt not go the way of the most powerful conference in college football? But be that as it may, if they don't get their way, if they get their way, you got to take it. If they don't get their way, they don't have to take it. Is that fair? It is not. Is it the way of the world? Yes, it is.